She walked back into his house on a Thursday, rolling a single suitcase, wearing the same brown coat she had on the last night he ever saw her. Marcus noticed the coat first. Then he noticed he was gripping the armrest of his wheelchair hard enough to feel in his shoulder. 3 years. No call. No letter. Nothing. And now Zora Caldwell was standing in his foyer, looking at him like she was the one who had been blindsided. His assistant, Patricia, was still talking. Something about credentials and references and the agency. Marcus wasn't listening. He was watching Zora's face do the thing it always did when she was trying not to feel something. Jaw tight, eyes steady, breathing controlled. She was terrified, and she was determined not to show it. So was he. Welcome to our channel, where we bring you emotional stories that stay with you. If you're new here, hit subscribe and the notification bell so you never miss a story. And if you're returning, thank you. Your support means everything. Now, stay until the end, drop a comment with your thoughts, and let's begin. Patricia had found her through an agency. That was the only explanation that made sense. The woman had worked for Marcus for 11 years and was thorough to the point of exhausting, but she didn't know everything. She didn't know that the quiet, highly recommended live-in caregiver she had selected, a woman with a nursing background, a clean record, and glowing references, had once slept on the left side of Marcus Whitfield's bed for 14 months. She didn't know that Marcus's mother had written Zora a check, or that Zora had taken it. Marcus knew both of those things. He had known them for 3 years. And standing in the foyer of his Connecticut estate on a gray Thursday afternoon, watching Zora try to hold herself together, he felt every single one of those years sitting on his chest. "Mr. Whitfield," Patricia said, gesturing toward Zora with a kind of professional warmth that meant she was proud of this hire. "This is Zora Caldwell. She comes very highly recommended. 7 years in patient care, 2 years in neurorehabilitation specifically. I really think she'll be a wonderful fit." Zora looked at him then, really looked at him, and for just a second, before she pulled it back, he saw it. The guilt, the grief, the thing she never got to say because she disappeared before he woke up in that hospital bed and found out that the world he thought he was building had already been dismantled. "Ms. Caldwell," he said. His voice came out even. He had learned how to do that. "Welcome." She blinked. Whatever she expected, it wasn't that. "Thank you, Mr. Whitfield." Mr. Whitfield. He almost smiled. Once, she called him Mark. Whispered it into his shoulder at 2 a.m. when she thought he was asleep. He had never told her he was awake. Patricia walked Zora through the house while Marcus stayed in the front sitting room, listening to the sound of footsteps moving from the east wing to the kitchen to the caregiver's suite on the ground floor. The suite had been added after the accident. Wide doorways throughout the house, an elevator installed between floors, handles in the bathrooms. His world had been remade around a version of himself he was still getting used to. A car accident. 2 years ago. Not the same accident that ended things with Zora. That had been something else entirely. Something he still hadn't untangled completely. Patricia reappeared in the doorway. "She seems lovely. Very calm." "She is," Marcus said, before he could stop himself. Patricia looked at him. She was 61 years old and had worked for him long enough to notice everything. "You've met her before?" "A long time ago." He turned his chair toward the window. Outside, the lawn was a flat brown of late autumn. Trees bare, sky the color of old pewter. "Make sure she has everything she needs. And tell her my schedule is her schedule. Whatever I need, she handles it. That's the job." "Of course." Patricia paused. "Marcus, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Patricia. Thank you." She left. He stayed at the window until he heard Zora's footsteps stop outside the sitting room door. She didn't knock, just stood there. He could feel it. "You can come in," he said. She stepped inside. She had taken the coat off. Underneath it, she wore a dark green shirt tucked into dark pants. Simple and professional. Nothing like the woman who used to steal his oversized sweatshirts and wear them to bed. Her hair was in a neat bun at the back of her neck. Locks pulled up carefully. He remembered when they were shorter. "I didn't know it was you," she said. "I need you to know that. The agency handles placement. They don't give out client names until the contract is signed. I know how agencies work. I'm not trying to explain myself. I'm just telling you the truth. You're a little late on that, don't you think? She flinched. Just barely. But he saw it. I can leave, she said. I'll contact the agency tonight. They'll find someone else within the week. Marcus turned to look at her fully then. She was still beautiful. That hadn't changed. It hadn't changed, and he resented it. Quietly and completely. She was standing near the door with her hands loose at her sides, chin up, pretending she wasn't falling apart. He knew that posture. He had seen it the night she told him her mother was sick. The night she sat in his kitchen at midnight, eating reheated soup and trying not to cry. "Sit down, Zora," he said. She sat on the edge of the chair nearest the door, like she might still run. "I'm not going to make this easy for you," he said. "I'm not going to pretend this is normal or act like I don't know who you are. But I'm also not going to be unprofessional. You were hired to do a job. The job is real. My condition is real. And I don't have the energy to go through another placement." He looked back at the window. "So you stay. We keep it professional. And whatever happened before stays where it is." She was quiet for a long moment. Okay, he repeated. She stood, smoothed her shirt, moved toward the door. "Zora." She stopped. "The coat," he said. "The brown one you were wearing." She turned slowly. "Throw it away," he said quietly, "or leave in your car. I don't want to see it in this house." She stared at him for 3 full seconds. Then she nodded and walked out. Marcus turned back to the window. His hands, resting on the armrests, were very still. He had learned how to do that too. The first week was professional. Clean, almost painfully so. Zora woke before him, had his morning medication sorted by 7, his breakfast ready by 7:30. She was quiet in the way that good caregivers learn to be, present without hovering, attentive without smothering. She helped him through his morning routine without making him feel watched. That mattered more than most people understood. He had fired 2 caregivers before her because they looked at him with that particular softness that was really just pity wearing a better outfit. Zora didn't do that. She looked at him straight, eyes level, like he was a man in a room and not a condition to be managed. He didn't know whether to be grateful or unsettled. Probably both. By the second week, he noticed the small things. She hummed when she cooked. Low, barely audible, something old school, the kind of melody that felt like it came from a grandmother's kitchen. She took her coffee black with 1 spoon of sugar, standing at the counter, looking out the window over the back garden. She always had a book somewhere on her person, different ones. He never saw her without one within reach. He remembered that. He just hadn't let himself remember it until now. On a Wednesday evening, she made smothered chicken with rice and collard greens as she cooked down low with a smoked turkey neck, the smell of it moving to the whole house like something warm and deliberate. Marcus had eaten alone in his study every night since she arrived. That night, he found himself wheeling toward the kitchen without fully deciding to. She had her back to him, stirring something on the stove. The radio on the counter was playing low, an old Anita Baker record, the kind of music that didn't ask anything of you but your full attention. "There's enough for 2, she said, without turning around. He stopped in the doorway. "I usually eat in my study." "I know. There's enough anyway." She lifted the lid, checked it, and put it back. "Up to you." He stayed. He didn't examine why. They ate at the kitchen table, which was the first time he had eaten in that room in over a year. She didn't fill the silence with noise. Didn't ask him questions about his life or his accident or how he was really doing in that way people asked when they wanted a story. She just ate her food and occasionally glanced out the dark window at the backyard like she was thinking about something far away. "You're still a good cook," he said. She looked at him. Something crossed her face, quick and unguarded. Then it settled. "My mom taught me the collard greens recipe before she passed. I don't mess with it." Her mother. He had met her once. A small woman with big opinions and the same direct eyes as her daughter. She had looked at Marcus for a long time during that first meeting, and then told Zora in a voice that was not quite quiet enough that he seemed like a man who was used to getting what he wanted. She hadn't been wrong. "I'm sorry about your mother," he said. "I didn't know she passed. It was about a year after I left." Zora set her fork down. She had been sick for a while. "You knew that." He did know that. He also knew that the medical bills had been significant. He had found that out later, when he started putting things together, and the picture that formed was not the one he had been carrying for 3 years. "Zora, I don't want to get into it tonight. Marcus." It was the first time she had used his name since she arrived. He felt it land somewhere in the middle of his chest. "We're going to have to talk about it eventually," he said. "Maybe." She picked her fork back up. "But not tonight. Tonight, I cooked a good meal and the Anita Baker is on, and I would like to just sit here for a little while, without everything being complicated." He looked at her, the line of her jaw, the way she held her shoulders when she was trying to stay steady. 3 years, and she still held tension in the exact same place. "Fine," he said. "Not tonight." They finished eating. She cleared the plates. He stayed at the table longer than necessary, listening to the last of the record play out. The 3rd week, she started sitting in on his physical therapy sessions. His therapist drove up from the city twice a week, a quiet, focused man named Derek who had worked with Marcus since the early months after the accident. Marcus had not wanted her in the room. He said nothing about it because technically it was within her role, but the first session she attended, he was shorter with Derek than usual, his jaw tight, the movements more controlled and fluid. Afterward, Derek left, and Zora was reorganizing his medical cabinet in the hallway, and Marcus came up behind her, or as close behind as the chair allowed, and said, "You don't need to be in there." She turned. They were closer than they had been since she arrived. He could see the small scar near her left eyebrow, the one she got falling off a bike when she was 9. She had told him that story once, laughing at herself. "It's part of my job," she said. "My arms work fine. My hands work fine. I don't need a nurse watching me do resistance exercises. I'm not watching you. I'm learning your baseline, how you move, where you compensate, what's harder on certain days. That's how I do my job properly." "Or," he said, "you're curious." Her eyes held his. "Maybe I am," she said quietly. "Is that so terrible?" He didn't answer. The space between them was too small, and the house was too quiet, and she was looking at him the way she used to look at him when she was trying to figure out if he was okay, without asking out loud. He backed his chair up, gave himself room to breathe. "Session starts at 9 on Thursdays," he said. "If you're going to be in the room, be on time." She nodded once. "I will be." He went down the hall to his study and closed the door and sat in the dark for a while, not turning the light on. Something was shifting. He could feel it the way you feel a change in weather before the sky shows it. Low and certain, and coming regardless of whether you were ready. He was not ready. But then, he had never been ready for anything that involved Zora Caldwell. It happened on a Friday night. For weeks in, Marcus had a call with his board that ran 3 hours longer than it should have. By the time it ended, his neck was tight, his shoulders were locked up, and he had the particular exhaustion that came not from physical effort, but from spending 3 hours being looked at by men who were still deciding whether his mind worked the same as it did before the accident. It did. It worked exactly the same. But he had learned that some people needed to be convinced of that repeatedly, and the convincing took something out of him every time. He came out of his study at close to 11, and the house was mostly dark. Zora was usually in her room by 9:30. She was not a woman who stayed up late without reason. But the kitchen light was on. He almost kept going, almost turned toward the elevator, and went upstairs and let the night end the way it was supposed to. Instead, he found himself in the kitchen doorway again, which was becoming a pattern he didn't fully want to examine. She was at the counter in a gray sweatshirt and pajama pants, her locks down and loose around her shoulders, reading her book with a mug of something warm near her elbow. She looked up when he came in, took in the tension he was carrying without making a production of it. "Bad call?" she asked. "Long call." She nodded, got up without being asked, and went to the cabinet, pulled out a mug, poured from the pot on the stove without asking what he wanted, because she already knew. She set the tea on the table at the spot she had started to think of as his. Chamomile, 2 spoons of honey. Something she had started keeping in the cabinet at the end of week 2 without commenting on it. He sat at the table. She went back to her book. He drank his tea. This was the thing about Zora that had undone him the first time. She didn't perform care. She just did it, quietly, without asking for acknowledgement. He had grown up in a family where affection was a transaction, where kindness came with an agenda attached. His mother was generous the way banks were generous, always calculating the return. His father had been warm in public and remote everywhere else. Zora had been the first person in his adult life who made him feel like being around him was enough. Not being around Marcus Whitfield, the company, the money, the name, just him. And then she left. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She looked up from her book. "Waited. When you took the money." He kept his voice level. "What did you tell yourself?" The mug in her hands didn't move. Her face didn't crumble. She looked at him for a long, steady moment, and then she set the book down flat on the table. "I told myself it was the practical choice," she said. "Your mother made it very clear that I was a problem she was solving. She had a number ready. She had a folder with information about my mother's medical debt. She was not there to negotiate." Zora's jaw tightened. "She was there to make me understand what it would cost to stay." Marcus was quiet. "I was 29 years old," Zora continued. "My mother was sick, and I was scared, and your mother sat across from me in a very expensive restaurant and explained very calmly that if I didn't take the check, she would make sure I couldn't find work in any hospital in the state." She paused. "I believed her. You could have told me. I tried to call you, Marcus. 3 times. Your number had already been changed." He went still. "I went to your office building," she said. "I was told by security that I was not on the approved entry list, and that if I returned they would contact the police." Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. They were pressed flat against the table now. "I was 29 years old, and I was being threatened, and I was alone, and I took the money and I left because I didn't know what else to do." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the bare trees, and the old house made its settling sounds, the small creaks and sighs of a building that had been standing longer than either of them had been alive. "I didn't change my number," he said. She looked at him. "I didn't change my number, Zora. I didn't have you removed from any entry list. I didn't know about any of it until about 8 months after you left, when I found a discrepancy in my mother's personal accounts and started pulling threads." He set his mug down. "By the time I understood what she had done, I didn't know how to find you. And then the accident happened, and everything else stopped mattering for a long time." Zora stared at him. Her eyes were bright in a way she was fighting hard against. "She told me you knew," she whispered. "She told me you had decided I wasn't a good fit for your life, and that this was the clean way to handle it." She lied. The word sat between them like something dropped from a great height, heavy, final, changing the shape of everything around it. Zora stood up, not to leave, just because she couldn't sit anymore. She moved to the window over the sink, her back to him, her arms wrapped around herself. Her locks fell forward over her shoulders. He watched her breathe, in and out, slow and deliberate, the way she breathed when she was trying to hold herself together from the outside in. He moved his chair around the table toward her, not close enough to crowd her, just close enough that when she turned around, he would be there. She turned around. Her eyes were wet, but nothing had fallen yet. She looked down at him, and he looked up at her, and the 3 years compressed suddenly into something very small, a thin wall between them that neither of them had actually built. His hand moved before he decided to move it, reached up and caught her wrist, lightly, the way you hold something you are afraid of breaking. She went very still. "You think I didn't look for you?" he said quietly. His voice came out rough at the edges. "You think I didn't spend the first 6 months after you left trying to understand what happened?" She shook her head. Not a no, just overwhelmed. "You think I can't want you like this?" he whispered. Her breath caught. Her free hand came up and covered her mouth, and she stood there in his kitchen at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, coming apart at the seams, and he held her wrist and didn't let go. If you're feeling this story, hype it so others can find it. Comment where you're watching from. Now, back to the story. She didn't pull away. That was the thing he noticed first. Her wrist stayed in his hand, and she stood there looking down at him with her eyes wet and her chest moving too fast, and she didn't pull away. "Marcus," she said. His name in her mouth still sounded like it used to, like something she had chosen carefully. "I know," he said. "I know it's complicated." "It's not just complicated." She sat down slowly on the floor in front of him, her back against the cabinet. So they were closer to the same level. He had seen her do this before, years ago, when a conversation got too heavy for chairs. She always said she thought better close to the ground. "We are two people who lost 3 years because of a lie. And now I'm your employee. And you're still figuring out who you are after everything that happened to you. And I'm still figuring out how to live with what I did, even if I was backed into it." She looked at him. "That's not just complicated. That's a lot." "It is a lot," he agreed. "So what do we do with it?" He looked at her on the floor, her locks loose, her sweatshirt too big for her, looking more like the woman he remembered than she had since she arrived. His chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with his injury. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I don't want to keep pretending I feel nothing. I'm not built for that." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "You never were. Neither were you." She looked at her hands in her lap. "I thought about you," she said quietly, "after I left. For a long time, I thought about you, and I told myself you had chosen it, that your mother was just delivering a message you didn't have the nerve to deliver yourself. I had to believe that to keep going." She looked up. It was the only way to be angry enough to survive it. "I know. I'm not angry anymore. I know that too." She reached up then, slow and careful, the way you move around something that might still be fragile. Her hand found his, the one resting on the armrest of his chair, and she covered it with hers. Warm. Steady. He turned his hand over and held hers. They stayed like that for a while. The tea went cold. The wind kept moving outside. The house kept breathing around them. Eventually she said, "Tell me about the accident." He had not talked about the accident with anyone outside of lawyers and medical professionals, and one very expensive therapist he stopped seeing after 4 sessions. He opened his mouth to redirect, the way he always did, and then he looked at her hand in his and changed his mind. "It was late," he said. "I was driving back from a meeting that had gone badly. I was distracted. There was ice on the road, and I was distracted, and I went off the overpass on Route 7. He paused. "I was in surgery for 6 hours. I woke up 2 days later, and Patricia was in the chair by the bed, and she had been crying, which I had never seen before in 11 years. And that was when I understood it was serious." Zora's hand tightened on his. "The damage is to my lower spinal cord," he continued. "Incomplete injury. I have some sensation and some movement, but not enough to walk without significant assistance, and not consistently enough to rely on. The chair is easier. The chair is mine now." He said that last part deliberately. He had worked hard to say it that way. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "Sometimes. Certain kinds of weather. Certain positions. It's manageable." She nodded. She wasn't looking at him with pity. She was looking at him with the focused attention of someone who was listening to understand, not to respond. "Were you scared?" she asked. Nobody had asked him that. Not once. His throat tightened. "Yes," he said. "For a long time I was scared." She squeezed his hand and said nothing, because nothing was exactly the right response. In the morning things were different. Not loud or dramatic or declared. Just different. The way a room feels different after you open a window that has been closed too long. She made breakfast, and he ate in the kitchen. She told him about her mother's last year, the good parts, the way the woman had insisted on cooking her own birthday dinner from her hospital bed by dictating every step to Zora over the phone. He laughed at that. A real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere unguarded. She looked at him when he laughed like she was relieved to hear it. Over the following weeks things moved slowly, deliberately, like two people who had already made the mistake of moving without looking and were not willing to do it again. He started leaving his study door open in the evenings. She started bringing 2 mugs of tea without being asked. They talked, really talked, the kind of talking that fills in the outline of a person you thought you knew and shows you the parts that grew and changed while you weren't watching. He told her about the months after the accident, learning his own body again. The frustration that sat so close to the surface some days that he had to send everyone home and sit alone in the dark. She told him about the years she spent moving from city to city, taking contracts, not staying anywhere long enough to feel like she was standing still, because standing still meant thinking. One evening, he was working late, and she knocked on the open study door and came in and sat across from him the way she used to, tucking her feet under her in the chair, opening her book. She didn't say anything. She just settled in, like it was a natural thing, like no time had passed at all. He watched her for a moment, then he went back to his work. It was the most peaceful he had felt in 3 years. A month later, he called his lawyer. There were things to address, things his mother had done that had legal weight. Records of the payment made to Zora, the documented pressure, and threats that Zora had kept evidence of in an email thread she had forwarded to herself the night it happened. Never quite able to delete it. He didn't tell Zora what he was doing. Not yet. Some things needed to be handled before they were spoken about. What he did do was knock on her door on a Sunday morning when the winter light was coming to the house in long flat strips, and she answered in her gray sweatshirt with her locks down and her book in her hand, and he looked at her and said, "I want to try. If you do." She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, a bird was making noise in the bare oak tree by the window. The house smelled like the coffee she had already made. "I'm already here," she said. He reached out his hand. She took it. It was not a perfect beginning. They both knew too much about each other's edges and scars for it to be simple. But it was honest, and it was chosen. By both of them this time, without pressure or agenda or anyone else's hand in it. That night she made sweet potato pie from her mother's recipe, the one she said she only made for people who deserved it. She put a slice in front of him without ceremony and went back to washing the pan. He took a bite. It was the best thing he had eaten in 3 years. He told her so. She smiled with her back to him, looking out the window over the sink. "I know," she said. "What would you rate this story?" Drop 0 to 10 in the comments right now. If this story moved you, hit subscribe for more emotional journeys every day. And if it truly touched your heart, consider leaving a super thanks. Your support helps us create more stories like this. Every contribution, big or small, means the world. Ready for the next story? It is even more dramatic than this one. Click now. Thank you for being part of this journey.